In the ancient city of Bruges, where canals mirror belfries and the air itself seems woven from centuries of silence, death arrived on the point of a needle. On a fog-chilled morning in October 1935, Madame Clotilde Dufour, the greatest lace-maker of her generation, was found seated at her pillow in the locked workshop of Rue des Aiguilles. A single steel bobbin needle protruded from her heart. The door bolted from within, the windows barred, no weapon but the needle itself, no sign of struggle. Hercule Poirot, visiting Belgium at the invitation of an old friend, gazed upon the scene and murmured, "Mon Dieu, such precision, such hatred!" Chapter 1. The Silent Workshop. The ancient city of Bruges lay shrouded in a dense October fog that rolled in from the North Sea, muffling the tolling of the belfry and turning the narrow canals into ribbons of dull pewter. It was the sort of morning when footsteps echoed too loudly and secrets seemed to cling to the very cobblestones. In the Rue des Aiguilles, a narrow lane lined with tall step-gabled houses, the workshop of Madame Clotilde Dufour stood silent behind its green-painted door. Inside that workshop, death had arranged itself with exquisite care. Madame Dufour sat upright at her lace pillow. The wide wooden frame that held her work pinned with hundreds of delicate bobbins. Her head had fallen forward slightly, as though she had merely dozed off in the midst of a complicated pattern. But from the centre of her black silk bodice protruded the slender shaft of an antique steel needle, one of the long, sharp bobbin pins, used for the finest Bruges lace. It had been driven upward beneath the sternum with such precision that only a single drop of blood darkened the fabric. Her hands, those celebrated hands that had created veils for queens and altarpieces for cathedrals, rested calmly in her lap. Fingers still curved, as if holding invisible threads. The room itself seemed frozen in time. Bolts of finest linen lay folded on shelves. Drawers stood half open, revealing parchment patterns yellowed with age. The air carried the faint, starchy scent of freshly boiled thread, and the sharper tang of old beeswax used to strengthen the bobbins. A single oil lamp still burned low on the table, its flame unwavering in the sealed space. The door to the street was locked and bolted from the inside. The key remained in the lock. The two small windows, high in the wall, were barred and painted shut decades earlier. No chair was overturned. No thread lay scattered. Nothing suggested struggle. Only a terrible, deliberate stillness. It was Elise van der Weyden, the apprentice who had worked beside Madame Dufour for 7 years, who discovered the body at 7 o'clock that morning. She had knocked, received no answer, and finally summoned a blacksmith to break the iron bolt. When the door swung open, she had stood frozen on the threshold for a long moment, before letting out a single sharp cry that brought neighbours running. By 9 o'clock, Inspector Jules Verhaeghe of the Bruges Police Judiciaire had arrived. Accompanied by a small, impeccably dressed gentleman with a perfectly waxed moustache and eyes of an extraordinary green. Hercule Poirot, on a brief visit to Belgium at the invitation of the Prefect of Police in Brussels, had been breakfasting at the Hôtel du Lac when news of the impossible crime reached him. Curiosity, professional and personal, had brought him to the Rue des Aiguilles without delay. Now Poirot stood in the centre of the workshop, gloved hands clasped behind his back, surveying the scene with the intense concentration he brought to every puzzle. Inspector Verhaeghe, a solid Flemish officer with a face like a worried bloodhound, hovered nearby. "Impossible, Monsieur Poirot," he repeated for the third time, wiping his forehead with a large handkerchief, despite the chill. "The door was bolted from within. The key on the inside. The windows have not been opened since the time of my grandfather. They are painted shut and barred besides. No chimney wide enough for a cat. And yet Madame Dufour is dead, killed by her own lace needle. Poirot did not reply immediately. He moved with deliberate slowness, examining first the body, then the lace pillow, then the floor around it. The unfinished piece upon the pillow was the famous Bruges rose, a pattern Madame Dufour had guarded jealously for years, coveted by collectors and merchants across Europe. The work was perhaps 3/4 complete, delicate petals of thread blooming in intricate symmetry, each stitch flawless. "Observe, Inspector," Poirot murmured at last, "the angle of entry. The needle was driven upward, beneath the ribs, directly into the heart. Such a thrust requires knowledge, either of anatomy or of the tools of lace-making themselves. A strong hand, yes, but not necessarily a man's. A woman familiar with these long steel pins could achieve it with precision." He knelt, peering at the floorboards. Dust lay thick in the corners, undisturbed except for the heavy boot prints of the blacksmith and the constable. No smaller prints, no sign of dragging or disturbance. "And the bolt," Poirot continued, rising and approaching the door. "Heavy iron, recently oiled, one can see the gleam. It slides easily, yet it was firmly in place when Mademoiselle van der Weyden arrived. The key turned from the outside only after the bolt was broken." Verhaeghe nodded gloomily. "We have taken statements. Mademoiselle van der Weyden lives in rooms 2 streets away. She claims she left the workshop at 6 o'clock yesterday evening, as usual. Madame Dufour often worked late, alone. No one saw anyone enter or leave after that hour." Poirot's gaze travelled slowly around the room and came to rest on the magnificent 17th-century tapestry that covered most of one wall. It depicted the Annunciation, the Virgin kneeling, the angel radiant with golden wings. The colours remained vivid despite centuries, crimson, indigo, threads of real gold. Something about the lower border caught his attention, a slight irregularity, as though the wall behind were not perfectly flat. He stepped closer, running a gloved finger along the woven edge. There, a faint bulge, almost imperceptible. But he filed the observation away for later. "Tell me of Madame Dufour," he said, turning back to the inspector. "Who would wish her dead? Who benefits?" Verhaeghe consulted his notebook. She was 68 years old, wealthy in her own right, childless, widowed long ago. Her workshop and patterns are worth a fortune. The latest will, drawn up only 3 weeks ago, leaves everything to her apprentice, Elise van der Weyden. Before that, the convent of St. Augustine was the chief beneficiary. Madame spent a year there as a young woman before choosing the world. "Interesting," Poirot murmured. "A change of heart. Or perhaps pressure applied. Then there is the nephew, Henri Dufour, dissolute, deep in gambling debts. He has not spoken to his aunt in years, but blood is blood. And Peter Claus, the lace merchant on the far side of the canal. He has offered enormous sums for exclusive rights to her patterns. She always refused, said they belonged to the heritage of Bruges, not to commerce." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And lastly?" "Father Laurent of St. Saviour's. He visited Madame yesterday evening for confession. Left at 9 o'clock. He seemed agitated when questioned. 4 suspects, 4 motives, and a room locked from within." Poirot returned to the body. Gently, he lifted one of Madame Dufour's hands. The fingers were cold, rigid, yet beneath the nails he noticed the faintest trace of blue-green staining. Monkshood, perhaps? Or merely the dye used in certain threads? He straightened, twirling his moustache thoughtfully. This is not a crime of passion, Inspector. It is a crime of calculation, of hatred long nurtured. The killer wished us to see the impossibility, to believe in ghosts or miracles. But Hercule Poirot, he believes only in the little grey cells. Outside, the fog pressed closer against the windows, as though listening. Inside the silent workshop, the lace pillow waited, its unfinished rose gleaming like a frozen flower. And somewhere in the delicate web of threads and motives, the truth lay hidden, sharp as the needle that had ended a life. Chapter 2. The heir apparent. The fog had thinned a little by midday, allowing pale sunlight to filter through the lace curtains of the small parlour above the workshop. Elise van der Weyden sat on a straight-backed chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, though the fingers betrayed her, twitching now and then as if seeking bobbins that were not there. She was a slight young woman of 26, with fair hair drawn severely back and eyes the colour of winter sea. Her black dress was plain, almost conventual, and spotlessly clean despite the morning's horror. Hercule Poirot entered first, removing his hat with a small bow. Inspector Verhaeghe followed, notebook already open. The room smelled faintly of lavender water and the starch that permeated every corner of the building. Mademoiselle van der Weyden, Poirot began in his precise French, the accent soft but unmistakably Belgian. Accept, I pray you, the sympathy of Hercule Poirot. This is a terrible shock. Elise inclined her head. Thank you, monsieur. I still cannot believe it. Madame was everything to me. Tell us, if you please, of your movements yesterday evening. She spoke calmly, though her voice was low. We finished work at 6 o'clock as always. Madame said she wished to continue alone on the Bruges Rose. It was a special commission for the Duchess of Alba. She often worked late when inspiration came. I locked the street door behind me. Madame had the only other key, and went to my rooms in the Rue Haute. My landlady, Madame Berthe, will confirm that I was home by 6:30. I prepared a light supper, read a little, and retired early. Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. You have been Madame Dufour's apprentice for 7 years? Yes. She took me on when I was 19, straight from the convent school. She said I had the gift. A faint smile touched her lips, then vanished. My hands were steady, my eyes sharp. She taught me everything, the old patterns, the secret stitches that no one else remembers. And in return you were devoted? Elise hesitated the merest fraction. Of course. She was like a mother to me. Strict, yes, very strict, but I understood. Perfection demands discipline. Verhaeghe cleared his throat. The will, mademoiselle. You are aware that Madame changed it recently? The colour drained from her already pale face. Yes. She told me 3 weeks ago. She said the convent had enough, that the craft should continue through someone who truly understood it. I was overwhelmed. I did not expect it. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And before this change, everything was to go to the Sisters of St. Augustine. That was the old will, yes. From years ago, after her husband died. She had once thought of returning to the convent herself. Yet she changed her mind. Why, do you think? Elise's fingers stilled completely. I do not know, monsieur. Perhaps she saw that I was ready, that the workshop would die without young hands. Poirot's green eyes held hers for a long moment. You arrived this morning at 7? Yes, I knocked several times. When there was no answer, I became anxious. Madame was always punctual. I fetched Monsieur Lefebvre, the blacksmith, from the corner. He broke the bolt, and then her voice broke at last. She pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. Poirot rose and moved to the window, looking down into the narrow street. One thing more, mademoiselle. Did Madame de Four have enemies? Enemies? Elise seemed genuinely surprised. No one who would this. She was respected, feared perhaps by those who could not match her standards. Peter Klaas came often, offering money for the exclusive patterns. She always refused. He was angry sometimes, but not murderous. And her nephew, Henri de Four. A shadow crossed her face. He has not come here in years. Madame said he was a disgrace. Gambling, debts. She would not receive him. Father Laurent visited yesterday evening. Yes, for confession. He left about 9 o'clock. Madame often received him. They were old friends from her youth. Poirot turned back to her. And you yourself, mademoiselle, did you ever quarrel with your mistress? The question hung in the air. Elise lifted her chin. We had differences, like any teacher and pupil. She demanded much. Sometimes she was harsh. But quarrel? No, monsieur. I owed her everything. Poirot bowed again. You have been most helpful. We shall speak again, without doubt. As they descended the narrow stairs, Verhaeghe muttered, She seems sincere enough, and the landlady confirms she was home by 6:30. Poirot paused on the landing. Sincere, yes, but afraid also. Did you not see it, mon ami? The way her eyes avoided the window when speaking of the will. The stillness of those restless hands when I asked about quarrels. They stepped back into the street. The fog had lifted further, revealing the canal with its silent swans. Poirot stopped abruptly. We must visit the notary at once. I wish to see both wills, the old and the new. The notary's office was in the Place de Bourg, a dignified building with leather-bound ledgers and the smell of sealing wax. Maître Dubois, a thin man with gold spectacles, received them gravely. Madame de Four was in excellent health when she signed the new will, he assured them. No coercion that I observed. She said simply that she had reconsidered. Her apprentice had proved worthy, and the craft must not die with her. And the previous will, made 15 years ago, everything to the convent, with small legacies to servants. The nephew was explicitly excluded. Poirot tapped his gloved fingers together. The signatures, were they witnessed properly? Impeccably. 2 clerks as witnesses. Madame's hand was always distinctive, bold, angular. They examined the documents. The new will was dated 3 weeks earlier. The ink appeared identical, the hand identical. Yet Poirot's moustache twitched, curious. Madame de Four mentions in a codicil that she felt watched in recent weeks. She instructed that if anything untoward happened, the police should be informed immediately. Maître Dubois nodded. She was uneasy, yes, but she would not say why. As they left the office, dusk was already gathering. Poirot paused beneath the belfry, listening to the carillon begin its evening melody. Something is not right, Inspector. The young mademoiselle inherits everything, yet Madame was uneasy. Someone felt watched, and the locked room. He fell silent as a boy approached, handing him a folded note. Poirot opened it beneath a street lamp. The paper was plain, the handwriting educated but hurried. The devil's bobbin brings death to those who betray the lace. Leave it be, little Belgian. No signature. The faint scent of starch clung to the paper. Poirot folded it carefully. We are observed, mon ami, and warned. The pattern begins to reveal itself, but the threads are tangled still. Chapter 3. The Rival Merchant. The canal lay like a strip of polished steel under the weak afternoon sun. As Poirot and Inspector Verhaeghe crossed the little humpbacked bridge toward the Emporium, of Peter Claes. The shop occupied a proud position on the corner of the Vollestraat, its wide windows displaying cascades of lace that caught what light there was and threw it back in soft, milky radiance. Above the door swung a carved wooden sign, a pair of gilded bobbins crossed like swords. Inside, the air was warmer and carried the faint perfume of new linen and money. Bolts of Mechlin, Valenciennes and Bruges lace stood ranked along the walls in careful gradations of fineness. Glass cases held antique pieces. A christening veil said to have belonged to Marie Antoinette, a flounce worn by the Empress Elizabeth of Austria. At the rear, behind a polished mahogany counter, Peter Claes himself presided like a prosperous burgomaster. He was a large man in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with a florid complexion and a beard trimmed to a precise point. His waistcoat strained across his chest, and a heavy gold watch chain gleamed against it. When he saw the two visitors, his small blue eyes narrowed momentarily before he arranged his face into an expression of polite regret. "Messieurs," he boomed, coming forward with hand outstretched. "Terrible news about Madame Dufour. A tragedy for Bruges, a tragedy for the craft. Come through to my office. Here we may speak privately." He led them past velvet curtains into a smaller room lined with ledgers and sample books. A gas fire hissed gently in the grate. Claes waved them to leather chairs and poured 3 small glasses of Geneva without asking. "To the memory of a great artist," he said, raising his glass. They drank. The spirit was strong and fragrant with juniper. Poirot set his glass down untouched after the single sip. "Monsieur Claes, you are known as the most important lace merchant in Flanders. You knew Madame Dufour well." Claes sighed heavily. "For 30 years. We began together almost. She was already famous, of course, but I bought her early work. Paid fairly, always. She was stubborn, proud. Qualities I respected. But in business." He shrugged expressively. "In business, you wish to acquire exclusive rights to her patterns," Poirot said softly. "Naturally. Who would not? The Bruges rose alone would have brought a fortune. I offered 50,000 francs, then 75. She refused every time. Said the patterns were the soul of Bruges and must remain free for all true lace-makers. Romantic nonsense, of course, but that was Clotilde." His tone carried admiration mixed with exasperation. "And this refusal angered you?" Claes laughed, a deep, hearty sound. "Angered? No, monsieur. Disappointed, yes, but I am a merchant, not a murderer. Besides," he spread his large hands, "I was in Ghent the night she died. The annual banquet of the Lace Guild. 20 witnesses, including the burgomaster himself. I did not return until this morning." Verhagen nodded. He had already checked the alibi and found it solid. Poirot's gaze wandered over the desk. Among the invoices and order books lay a small tray of antique lace tools, ivory bobbins, bone prickers, and several long steel needles identical to the one that had killed Madame Dufour, except that the eyes were very slightly larger. A variation from a different period. Claes noticed the direction of his glance. "Ah, you observe my little collection. I am a connoisseur of the tools as well as the lace. Those needles are from the 18th century, rare survivors. The steel was finer then." Poirot picked one up delicately between gloved fingers. "And the needle that killed Madame Dufour, it resembled these." "Superficially, yes, but hers were modern, made especially for her by a cutler in Lille. The eyes are smaller, the points sharper. A craftsman can tell at a glance." Poirot replaced the needle. "Tell me, monsieur, did Madame Dufour ever accuse you of trying to steal her patterns?" Claes's eyebrows rose. Steal, never. I offered to buy openly, though, he hesitated, though, there were rumours. A year ago, certain designs appeared in Brussels, very close to Madame's unpublished work. She blamed me, publicly. We quarrelled bitterly in the marketplace. She called me a thief of souls. I threatened to sue for slander. He shrugged again, but it came to nothing. The designs were similar, not identical. Coincidence, perhaps, or someone else copying. Someone close to her, perhaps? Poirot suggested gently. Close's eyes sharpened. You mean the little apprentice? Elise van der Weyden? A quiet mouse, but clever with her fingers. Who knows what goes on in that workshop after hours? They left soon afterward. In the street, Verhege said, He is telling the truth about Ghent, and he is right about the needles. Our expert confirmed the difference. Poirot walked slowly, hands behind his back. Truth, yes, but not the whole truth. He desires those patterns more than he admits, and he knows more of the rumours than he says. Notice how quickly he pointed to the apprentice. They turned toward a small café overlooking the canal to interview the nephew, Henri Dufour. He was already waiting at an outdoor table, a thin, nervous young man in a threadbare overcoat, smoking cigarette after cigarette. Henri's story was simple and sordid. Disinherited years ago for gambling debts, he had not seen his aunt in 5 years. He admitted needing money desperately, creditors were pressing, but swore he had been playing cards in a tavern near the railway station until dawn. The patron and 3 other players confirmed it. As they rose to leave, Poirot overheard Henri mutter to a companion at the next table, If only the old witch had sold to Claus when she had the chance, we'd all be richer now. Back in the street, Poirot paused. 2 suspects with powerful motives, greed for the merchant, desperation for the nephew, both with alibis that appear unbreakable. And yet, he looked across the canal toward the green door of the workshop, now sealed with police tape. And yet the room was locked from within. Someone wishes us to believe in the impossible. But Hercule Poirot knows that the impossible is merely the truth disguised. A light rain began to fall, dimpling the water. Somewhere in the distance, the belfry struck 4. The little Belgian pulled up his collar and walked on, his mind threading possibilities as deftly as any lace-maker at her pillow. Chapter 4. Confession and Convent. The rain had turned to a fine Flemish drizzle by late afternoon, the kind that seeped through overcoats and moods alike. Hercule Poirot and Inspector Verhege sought refuge in the sombre quiet of St. Saviour's Cathedral, where the air was thick with incense and the echo of centuries. Shafts of coloured light from the high stained-glass windows fell across the flagstones like scattered petals. Father Laurent was waiting in the Lady Chapel, a side altar dedicated to Our Lady of the 7 Sorrows. He was a tall, ascetic man in his 60s, with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to have seen too many confessions. His cassock hung loosely on his frame, and his fingers worried at a wooden rosary as he rose to greet them. "Messieurs," he said softly, his voice carrying the cadence of the seminary, "I expected you would come. This tragedy weighs heavily upon us all." Poirot inclined his head. "Mon père, we disturb you with regret. Yet the death of Madame Dufour demands clarity. You visited her yesterday evening?" Father Laurent nodded. "Yes, at her request. She telephoned the presbytery in the afternoon and asked if I would hear her confession. I arrived at 8 o'clock and left at 9. "Confession," Poirot repeated gently. "You understand that what was said under the seal remains inviolable." "Of course," the priest's face tightened. "I may not reveal the matter of her confession, but I can tell you that she was deeply troubled. She spoke of a great sin from her past, one that had returned to torment her. She feared consequences. Consequences for herself or for another? Father Laurent hesitated. For someone close to her. She believed that harm was intended, and that her own earlier actions had set it in motion. Verhaeghe shifted impatiently. Did she name this person? No, the seal forbids it. But she wept, monsieur. I have known Clotilde de Four since we were young, before I took orders, when she herself was a postulant with the Sisters of St. Augustine. She was always proud, always fierce in her loves and hates. To see her thus humbled, he shook his head. Poirot's gaze rested on the priest's trembling hands. And after you left, mon père, did you notice anyone in the street? Any movement near the workshop? Nothing. The fog was already thick. I walked straight back to the presbytery. My housekeeper will confirm the hour. The alibi, Poirot noted silently, would be as solid as the others. They left the cathedral and turned toward the convent of St. Augustine, a quiet enclave behind high brick walls near the Minnewater. The portress admitted them without question. News of the murder had already reached even this enclosed world. The Mother Superior, Reverend Mother Marie Clotilde, received them in a sparse parlour that smelled of beeswax and dried herbs. She was an old woman, straight-backed, with eyes like polished jet. Clotilde de Four was once one of us, she said calmly. She entered at 19, full of fervour. She had a rare talent even then. Her lace was prayer made visible. But after a year she left. There was a young man, a novice from the Jesuit house who came to repair the organ. They fell in love. It was discovered he was sent away. He took his own life a month later. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. And Madame de Four? She never forgave herself. She returned to the world, married a lace merchant who died young, and devoted her life to the craft. She supported the convent generously over the years, until the new will, of course. You knew of the change? Maître Dubois informed us, as a courtesy. We were surprised, but not bitter. God provides. The old nun's voice was serene. Yet in recent weeks Clotilde came here often. She walked in the garden, sat in the chapel. She seemed afraid. She spoke of betrayal, of patterns stolen, of trust broken. Stolen patterns? Verhaeghe leaned forward. She would say no more, only that the past was repeating itself, and that someone she had raised up would destroy her as she had once destroyed another. Poirot rose and moved to the window. Beyond the glass lay the convent garden, neat herb beds, a few late roses, and, his eye sharpened, a tall clump of purple flowers with hooded blooms. Monk's hood, he murmured, Aconitum napellus, most poisonous. The Mother Superior followed his gaze. Yes, we grow it for medicinal use, under strict control. A tincture for heart conditions in minute doses. The roots and leaves are deadly. Has any been taken recently? Not to my knowledge, but the garden is accessible to the lay sisters and visitors. They walked the paths before leaving. The monk's hood stood in a shadowed corner, its stems heavy with seed pods. Poirot bent and examined the soil. Several stalks appeared freshly cut. Curious, he said to Verhaeghe as they retraced their steps toward the gate. A poison that kills swiftly, almost painlessly, yet leaves the body unmarked, save for the entry wound. Applied to a needle, it would appear as simple stabbing, and the heart would stop within minutes. Verhaeghe frowned. But the locked room, patience, mon ami. The pieces assemble themselves. That evening, back at the Hôtel du Lac, Poirot dined alone in his room. The waiter had scarcely withdrawn when a second folded note was slipped beneath the door. The paper was the same, plain, faintly starched. The handwriting identical to the first warning. The devil's bobbin turns again. Ask the priest what she confessed, or the needle will find another heart. Poirot sat for a long while, twirling his moustache, staring at the flame of the single candle on his table. "The killer grows nervous," he murmured at last. "Good. Nervosity leads to mistakes. Tomorrow we return to the workshop. There is something behind that tapestry I must see more closely. And the Bruges rose itself. Perhaps it conceals more than beauty." Outside the rain had ceased. The canals lay black and still, reflecting the gas lamps like scattered stars. Somewhere in the ancient city, a clock struck 9. Poirot extinguished the candle and sat in darkness, letting the little grey cells work undisturbed. Chapter 5. The Hidden Passage. Dawn came pale and reluctant over Bruges, the sky a washed-out pearl above the rooftops. A cold wind stirred the canals, sending ripples across the water like flaws in fine lace. Hercule Poirot arrived at the Rue des Aiguilles before 7, accompanied by Inspector Verheyen and 2 constables. The green door stood sealed as they had left it, the broken bolt replaced by a police padlock. Inside the workshop, nothing had been touched. Madame Dufour's body had been removed to the morgue, but her lace pillow remained exactly as she had left it. The Bruges rose 3/4 complete, bobbins hanging motionless like frozen tears. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of starch and death. Poirot wasted no time. He crossed directly to the great Annunciation tapestry that covered the end wall. "Assist me, if you please," he said quietly. Verheyen and 1 constable lifted the heavy weaving from its hooks. As it came away, dust sifted down like fine ash. Behind it, set flush into the panelling, was a narrow wooden door, painted the same dark oak as the wall. It was barely wider than a man's shoulders, and almost invisible unless one knew where to look. Verheyen gave a low whistle. "A priest's hole, or a smuggler's passage?" "Neither, I think," Poirot replied. "Observe, there is no lock, only a simple latch on this side. And the hinges are well oiled." He lifted the latch. The door opened inward without a sound, revealing a narrow corridor, barely lit by cracks in the ancient brickwork. The air that breathed out was colder damp, carrying the faint green smell of the convent garden. They followed it cautiously. The passage ran straight for 20 meters, then turned sharply left and ended at another small door. This one opened onto the herb garden of the Sisters of St. Augustine, concealed behind a screen of clipped yew. Verheyen stepped out and looked around. Anyone could have come this way unseen. The garden gate to the lane is never locked during daylight. At night, a shadow only. Poirot knelt in the passage, examining the dusty floor with his pocket lens. Near the workshop end, he found what he sought. A single faint footprint in the dust. Small, narrow, the mark of a woman's low-heeled shoe. "So," he said, rising, "the locked room becomes merely a stage. The bolt was drawn from inside after the murder, the door closed, and the killer departed by this route. Simple, once one knows the secret." They returned to the workshop. Poirot replaced the tapestry carefully, then turned his attention to the lace pillow itself. With infinite delicacy, he began to unpin the unfinished Bruges rose, lifting the delicate web of threads until the parchment pattern beneath was revealed. And there, folded small and hidden beneath the central rose motif, lay a single sheet of paper in Madame Dufour's bold, angular hand. Poirot unfolded it and read aloud. "To be opened only in the event of my death. Elise van der Weyden has betrayed my trust utterly. For more than a year, she has copied my unpublished patterns and sold them secretly to Peter Klaas. I have proof, duplicate tracings hidden in her rooms and letters from Klaas acknowledging payment. Tomorrow, I shall confront her and inform the police. If I die before this is done, know that she is responsible. Clotilde Dufour, dated this 14th day of October, 1935. Verhaeghe stared. Proof of motive, and strong enough for any court. Poirot folded the letter and placed it in his pocketbook. Yes. The young apprentice stood to lose everything. Reputation, freedom, inheritance. Madame Dufour had discovered the theft and intended exposure. Hence the haste, the murder committed before the confrontation could take place. But the theatricality, Verhaeghe objected. The needle, the locked room, why not a simple poisoning in her tea? Poirot paced slowly, hands behind his back. Because Elise is clever. She wished to cast suspicion widely. The rival merchant who coveted the patterns, the desperate nephew, even the priest with his guilty knowledge of the past, and above all, the old superstition of the devil's bobbin, an antique lace tool said to be cursed, bringing death to betrayers of the craft. By using a lace needle and locking the room, she hoped we would see a ritual killing, perhaps even a suicide. He paused before the pillow, and the poison, monkshood from the convent garden, where she often walked on errands. Applied to the needle's point, it would ensure death even if the thrust itself was not perfectly placed. Verhaeghe nodded slowly. Everything fits, but we must confirm the proof in her rooms. They were preparing to leave when a constable entered, holding yet another folded note. This was pushed under the street door, sir. No one saw who left it. Poirot opened it. Same paper, same educated feminine hand. Leave the lace alone, little Belgian, or the needle finds another heart. He smiled thinly. The killer knows we are close. Panic begins. Good! Outside, the morning had brightened. Swans glided past on the canal, as if nothing had changed. Poirot pulled his coat tighter against the wind. Today we search Mademoiselle van der Weyden's rooms, and tonight, I think the pattern will be complete. But we must move carefully. A cornered lace maker can still prick deeply. Chapter 6. The Psychology of Lace. The following morning, the workshop in the Rue des Aiguilles felt colder than before, as though Madame Dufour's absence had drawn the chill of the grave into the very threads. Hercule Poirot had ordered the room prepared exactly as it had been on the night of the murder. The lace pillow in place, the oil lamp lit, the Annunciation tapestry rehung to conceal the passage. Only the body was missing. At 10 o'clock precisely, the 4 principal suspects were assembled. Elise van der Weyden sat nearest the pillow, pale and composed in her black dress, hands folded in her lap but no longer twitching. Peter Klaas occupied a high-backed chair by the window, his bulk making it creak. He smoked a thin cigar and watched the proceedings with wary blue eyes. Henri Dufour slouched against a bolt of linen, coat unbuttoned, fingers drumming nervously on his thigh. Father Laurent stood apart near the door, rosary in hand, his face drawn with sleepless anxiety. Inspector Verhaeghe and 2 constables completed the circle. Poirot stood in the centre. Small, immaculate, hands clasped behind his back. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Mesdames et messieurs, he began quietly, his voice carrying effortlessly in the small room. We are here to untangle a web more delicate than any Bruges lace. A woman has been murdered with exquisite precision in a room locked from within. Motives abound: greed, desperation, fear of scandal, betrayal. Yet only one person could have accomplished this crime. He paused, letting his gaze rest on each face in turn. Lace-making, he continued, is not merely a craft. It is a discipline of the soul. Hours, days, years at the pillow, fingers bleeding, eyes straining, every stitch an act of will. Madame de Four was a tyrant of perfection. She demanded the impossible from those around her, and most of all from the one closest to her. Elise's lips parted, but she said nothing. Poirot moved to the lace pillow and touched the unfinished Bruges rose with a gloved finger. This pattern was her masterpiece, guarded jealously. Yet for more than a year, copies of her unpublished designs appeared in the market, sold secretly to Monsieur Claus here, who believed he was dealing honourably with an authorised agent. Claus shifted uncomfortably. I paid fairly for what was offered me. I did not know. Precisely, Poirot interrupted gently. You did not know they were stolen. But Madame de Four discovered the truth. She found duplicate tracings, letters, proof. She wrote a denunciation to be opened only in the event of her death. A denunciation that names Mademoiselle van der Weyden as the thief. Elise's composure cracked for the first time. That letter is a forgery. She was becoming confused in her old age, paranoid. Poirot smiled sadly. No, mademoiselle. The handwriting has been examined by experts. It is unquestionably hers. And the proof she spoke of, duplicate patterns, letters in your hand, has been found this morning in your rooms, exactly where she said it would be. A small gasp escaped Elise. Henri de Four straightened, eyes widening. Claus crushed out his cigar with sudden violence. Poirot continued inexorably. Madame intended to confront you the morning after her death and hand you to the police. You could not permit that. You knew of the hidden passage, used often for errands to the convent. You waited until Father Laurent left at 9 o'clock. You entered unseen, carrying a lace needle dipped in monkshood essence distilled from the convent garden. You struck while she worked late, absorbed in her pattern. One thrust, precise, upward beneath the ribs. The poison ensured death within minutes. Father Laurent whispered, Mon Dieu! You then bolted the door from inside, departed by the passage, and returned to your rooms. To establish your alibi, you called good night to your landlady from the stairs. An excellent imitation of your own voice from the lower landing, then slipped out the back way. The landlady, elderly and slightly deaf, heard only what she expected to hear. Elise laughed suddenly, a high, brittle sound that echoed strangely in the room. A pretty story, monsieur, but impossible to prove. Where is this deadly needle now? Removed by the police, cleaned, examined. No trace of poison remains, I imagine. Poirot inclined his head. True, but traces of monkshood were found beneath Madame de Four's fingernails, where she scratched her own palm in her death throes. And in your rooms, hidden beneath a floorboard, we discovered a small vial containing the residue of the same preparation. Your fingerprints are upon it. Elise's face went deathly white. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of a clock in the parlour above. At last she spoke, voice low and shaking. She was going to destroy me. After everything I endured, her rages, her cruelty, the endless demands, she called me worthless the very day she planned to change the will back to the convent. I had forged the new one weeks earlier, hoping to secure my future. She found it. She laughed at me, said I would end in prison like the thief I was. Tears began to course down her cheeks, but her eyes were hard. I only wanted what was mine. The patterns, the workshop, the recognition. She had taken everything from others in her youth, driven that poor novice to his death with her pride. I found his letters hidden in her desk. She was no saint. Poirot regarded her with profound sadness. And so you repeated the pattern, mademoiselle. You destroyed the one who threatened to destroy you. The notes warning me away, invoking the old curse of the devil's bobbin, those were yours also, written to confuse the investigation. Elise bowed her head. Yes. Inspector Verhaeghe stepped forward. Elise van der Weyden, I arrest you for the murder of Clotilde de Four. As the handcuffs clicked shut, she looked once more at the lace pillow, at the unfinished rose gleaming in the lamplight. She would have been proud of the precision, she whispered. One perfect thrust. Poirot turned away. Outside, weak sunshine touched the canal, turning the water to molten silver. The case was closed, the pattern complete, but the little Belgian felt no triumph, only the familiar melancholy that follows the revelation of a human heart laid bare. Chapter 7. The Devil's Bobbin. The workshop seemed to exhale as Elise van der Weyden was led away. The constable's footsteps echoed up the narrow stairs, then faded into the street, leaving only the faint creak of the building and the soft patter of rain against the high windows. Peter Klaas cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. "Well, monsieur," he said, rising heavily, "you have untied a most intricate knot. I confess I bought the patterns in good faith. If restitution is required," Poirot raised a gloved hand, "that is a matter for the courts and the convent, monsieur. You are a pawn, not the player." Klaus nodded, gathered his hat and departed with surprising haste, as though eager to escape the atmosphere of the room. Henri Dufour lingered a moment longer, a bitter smile twisting his lips. So, the old woman's money goes to the nuns after all? And I get nothing, not even the satisfaction of seeing the apprentice hang. He shrugged into his coat. At least my debts remain my own. He too left, whistling tunelessly as he descended the stairs. Father Laurent remained. The priest approached Poirot slowly, rosary beads clicking softly. "You have done justice, Monsieur Poirot," he said, voice low. "But justice is cold comfort. Clotilde carried that earlier death all her life, the young man who loved her and could not bear the parting. She believed herself cursed. Perhaps in the end she was." Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. "The curse was not supernatural, mon père. It was the curse of a proud heart that could not forgive itself, and that taught others to wound in return. Mademoiselle van der Weyden repeated the pattern she learned at her mistress's knee: destroy or be destroyed." Father Laurent sighed. "She spoke of it in confession, that old sin. She feared Elise had discovered the letters and would use them against her. She wanted absolution before the confrontation. And you gave it? I gave it, but absolution does not undo consequence." He made the sign of the cross in the air between them. "I shall pray for both women tonight." He turned to leave, then paused. "The devil's bobble, was there truly such a thing?" Poirot smiled faintly. "An old tale, yes. A bobbin carved from yew, said to have been used by a lace-maker who poisoned her rival in 1673. It was supposed to bring death to betrayers. Mademoiselle Elise knew the story from Madame's own lips and used it cleverly to frighten us away. But the only devil here was the one we carry within." The priest nodded and departed, his footsteps slow and measured. Alone now with Inspector Verhaeghe, Poirot stood before the lace pillow one last time. He touched the delicate threads of the unfinished Bruges rose. "Such beauty," he murmured, "born of such pain. The fingers that created this drove another to despair and taught a third to kill. Perfection is a harsh mistress, mon ami." Verhaeghe shifted awkwardly. "Will the convent complete the pattern?" "I believe so. The Mother Superior has already spoken of dedicating it to the memory of both women, master and apprentice. A veil for the high altar, perhaps. Redemption woven into every stitch." He unpinned one of the antique bobbins, an ivory piece carved with tiny roses, and slipped it into his pocket. "A souvenir," he explained with a twinkle, to remind Hercule Poirot that even the most delicate threads can bind the human heart in chains. They closed the workshop door behind them for the last time. The rain had ceased. Weak sunlight glimmered on the wet cobblestones and turned the canal into a ribbon of pale gold. Somewhere a swan beat its wings, the sound carrying clearly across the water. Chapter 8. The Pattern Revealed. 3 days later, Hercule Poirot sat alone in the small parlour above the workshop, the room now stripped of police seals and the bustle of investigation. The lace pillow had been carefully packed and sent to the convent of St. Augustine, along with all Madame Dufour's patterns, parchments and tools. The Bruges rose would be completed there, stitch by deliberate stitch, by the lay sisters under the Mother Superior's quiet supervision. Sunlight, rare for December in Bruges, slanted through the lace curtains and fell across the empty table where Poirot took his coffee. Inspector Verhaeghe had departed for Brussels with the prisoner. The newspapers had already begun to weave their own sensational versions of the tale: the locked workshop mystery, the devil's bobber, the apprentice's betrayal. Poirot sipped his coffee and contemplated the silence. He thought of Madame Dufour, proud, brilliant, unforgiving. A woman who had driven one lover to despair in her youth and, without intending it, shaped another soul in the same cruel mould. Her legacy was not merely the exquisite lace that would adorn altars and museums, but the torment she had inflicted on those who loved her most. She had demanded perfection and received, in the end, a perfect death, one thrust precise and final. And Elise van der Weyden, a victim twice over, first of her mistress's tyranny, then of her own fear. She had taken the patterns because she believed they were owed to her talent. She had forged the will because she could not bear to lose the only world she knew. She had killed because exposure meant annihilation. Poirot set down his cup. "The psychology of lace," he murmured to the empty room. "So fine, so fragile, and yet capable of cutting to the bone." He rose and walked to the window. Below, the canal reflected a pale winter sky. A barge glided past, its wake spreading in perfect circles that slowly dissolved. Life resumed its quiet rhythm in Bruges, undisturbed by the passions that had flared and died behind one green door. Father Laurent had been right. There was no supernatural curse. Only the ancient human pattern. Pride begetting cruelty. Cruelty begetting betrayal. Betrayal begetting death. And then, perhaps in the patient hands of the nuns, a measure of redemption. Poirot twirled his moustache, satisfied yet melancholy. Another triumph for the little grey cells. Another reminder that order restored is never the same as innocence regained. He collected his hat and gloves. The train to Ostend, and then the boat to England, waited. London called with its fogs and its own intricate mysteries. As he closed the parlour door behind him, the faint scent of starch lingered one last time, like a farewell from the lace itself. The workshop below stood empty now, its secrets told, its threads gathered in. Chapter 9. Epilogue. The needle returns. Spring came early to Bruges that year, softening the ancient stones with pale sunlight and filling the canals with the reflection of budding willows. In March, a small parcel arrived at Hercule Poirot's flat in Whitehaven Mansions, London. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with simple twine, and bore a Belgian postmark. Poirot turned it over in his hands with mild curiosity before cutting the string. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue, lay the antique steel lace needle, the very one that had pierced Madame Dufour's heart. It had been meticulously cleaned and polished. No trace remained of its grim history, Wrapped around it was a length of the finest Bruges lace, the completed Bruges rose pattern, now transformed into a delicate altar veil. The petals seemed almost to tremble in the light, each stitch flawless. A note accompanied the gift, written in a firm, elderly hand. Dear Monsieur Poirot, the veil is finished. The Sisters of St. Augustine dedicate it to the repose of Clotilde de Four, and to the redemption of Elise van der Weyden, who, in her final statement before trial, asked that her teacher's greatest work be completed in a place of peace. The needle we return to you. It belongs neither to the convent nor to the workshop, but to the man who restored truth. May God bless you. Mother Marie Clotilde, OSA. Poirot laid the veil across his table, smoothing it with gentle fingers. The pattern was exquisite, more beautiful perhaps for the patience and prayer that had completed it. He lifted the needle and held it to the light. So slender, so innocent-looking, an instrument of death in one hand, of transcendent art in another. He placed it carefully in a small velvet-lined box on his desk, beside other mementos of cases long closed, a scorched airline timetable, a fragment of green jade, a tiny ivory elephant. Order and method, he murmured to himself, a faint smile touching his lips. Even in tragedy, the pattern completes itself. The rose blooms at last. Outside his window, London traffic hummed distantly. Poirot poured himself a small glass of crème de menthe, raised it toward the veil in a silent toast, and settled into his chair. Another mystery resolved. Another reminder that human hearts are the most intricate lace of all. Beautiful, fragile, and sometimes deadly. Chapter 10. Closing credits. Hercule Poirot lingered a moment longer in his sunlit London flat, the Bruges veil draped across the table like a fragile ghost of winter past. He lifted the corner of the lace, letting the light play through its intricate rose pattern, then folded it with care and placed it in a drawer alongside other quiet trophies of victories that tasted faintly of ash. He poured a second small glass of crème de menthe, raised it once more to the empty room, and spoke aloud in the silence, to the lace-makers, living and dead, to the threads that bind us, some of silk, some of steel, and to the little grey cells which untangle even the most knotted hearts. He drank, set the glass down with finality, and turned to the window. London lay spread below, orderly and bustling, its own mysteries waiting in fog-shrouded streets and shadowed drawing-rooms. Somewhere in Bruges, the altar veil now hung in the convent chapel, catching candlelight during evening vespers. The nuns would pray beneath it for two women, one proud and unforgiving, one brilliant and broken, while the canals flowed on as they had for centuries, carrying secrets gently out to sea. The case of the lacemaker's needle was closed, filed away in Poirot's meticulous memory, beside 100 others. Yet, in quiet moments, he would touch the velvet box on his desk, feel the cool steel within, and remember that perfection, pursued too fiercely, can pierce the heart as surely as any poisoned point. Outside, a spring breeze stirred the curtains. Poirot smoothed his moustache, adjusted his tie, and prepared for the next summons, whatever it might be, wherever it might lead. For Hercule Poirot, the pattern of life was never truly finished. There were always new threads to follow, new knots to unravel. The rose had bloomed, the needle rested, and the greatest detective in the world turned his face toward the future, content for the moment in the symmetry of justice achieved.